Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are here today to officially dedicate our fallen hero memorial. And this was a vision of retired Chief Cam Sanchez and a team of officers several years ago. Each and every day, men and women in law enforcement put themselves at risk to keep the community safe and secure. Most return from their shift to their friends and families, but some are called upon and have made the ultimate sacrifice. This is a heavy burden that all officers accept willingly when they enter the profession. Without courageous officers, there would be no security, and without their sacrifice, there would be no justice. We consider ourselves part of the community, and a safe community is a shared responsibility. So thank you very much to the public and to our supporters who are dedicated to the partnership that we have. And thank you for being here today to honor our heroes. We appreciate your partnership. With that, I'd like to introduce Sergeant Riley Harwood, who is one of the key people responsible for today. Thank you, Riley.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for coming and joining our celebration. Special thanks to Jane Grand, to Leanne Sarr, and Kevin Huddle. Your presence here makes this event today just that much more special, so thank you for being here. If you could all please stand for the posting of the colors, and then remain standing for a rendition of the national anthem by Alyssa Holtke.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight on the ramparts we've watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the hope of the brave.
And if you could remain standing, please, for our invocation by our SBPD Police Chaplain, retired Sergeant Mike McGrew.
Good morning, let's pray. God, we thank you for this day. And we thank you for this opportunity to gather and to honor those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. You tell us that there is no greater love than to lay one's life down for his friends. And so we gather here today, God, to honor those who have done that, who have shown that love for this community. We gather there here today, Lord, to show our love for their family members. God, we gather here to honor those who continue to go out every day and every night and take that risk, but are willing to lay their lives down to protect this community. Lord, we thank you for the community members that came together to make this possible, for their generous hearts, Lord, that helped to put up this symbol that everybody can see, to know that this job matters, Lord, that the people who were called to this job, that were called to this mantle, are important, that they are to be honored, and that the people who do this job can see that love by this community. So we thank you that you've gathered this group here today to fellowship, to celebrate this profession, to celebrate this mantle, to honor the loved ones of the fallen officers, and to honor the memory of those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. So we ask that you just bless this day, and we pray this in the name above all names, and we say amen.
Out. 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 Out.
Thank you. Please be seated. So today we're going to celebrate. We're not going to mourn. And there's a reason why I'm not wearing a mourning band on my badge, because we've mourned the passing of these men already. Today we're here to celebrate. It's not, even though we're going to do some things that are reminiscent of some more somber events, today's going to be a celebration. We're going to honor these 6 remarkable men whose names are on this wall and celebrate the fact that we finally have a memorial here in Santa Barbara, recognizing them and befitting of their sacrifice. And after we're done here, we're going to continue our celebration with the community and with our other first responder family and other folks from our city family as well. Just a little bit of background on what brought us here today. Almost 4 years ago to this day, then Santa Barbara Police Chief Cam Sanchez called me into his office, which was right up there, and he said, "Riley, I want there to be a memorial, a fallen officer memorial." And he looked out the window and he pointed right down here and he says, "I want it right there." And so that started a 4-year process. Almost 20 employees gathered together as a committee, and we researched a number of ideas as far as what we wanted our memorial to be. And we were aided by renowned Santa Barbara sculptor Bud Bottoms, who's most well known for the dolphin fountain statue at the base of Stearns Wharf. And sadly, Bud passed away at the age of 90 just this last week. But hopefully, what we have here today is another testament to his legacy in our community. But Bud helped us design this memorial. He took a lot of our ideas and he sketched them out so we could kind of visualize what these concepts that we were thinking about. And ultimately we settled on this. An officer on bended knee comforting a child with a flag and wearing an SBPD 8-point cover, perhaps her mom or dad's, a poignant moment common to service funerals. Bud then put us in contact with his colleague Dorothy Boyle of Paso Robles. Dorothy, if you could please stand up. Dorothy is the sculptor who sculpted this masterpiece that you see here today. Thank you so much. A painstaking labor of love. It started first in miniature and then in life size, in clay, and wax, and then ultimately in the bronze that you see here. And Dorothy, what you produced far exceeded our expectations. It's just phenomenal. It's a beautiful and long-lasting tribute to our fallen officers. And now my goal here for today is that by the time we leave, that these are no longer just names on a wall, but rather that we honor these men by getting to know who they were, know of their sacrifice, and what it was like to police in Santa Barbara in their day. And there's a reason why, in a short while, we're going to have some horses out here, but we'll have an officer with a motorcycle, but we'll have some detectives out here. And it's because, as you're about to learn, those are some of the activities, some of the jobs that these men did in their day. And so to help us get to know our 6 fallen heroes, I've solicited the help of Santa Barbara historian Neil Graffey and retired SBPD Sergeant Daryl Scari. So gentlemen, if you could please come up.
I'd like to thank you for the invitation to come here today, and especially to learn who the first 4 gentlemen were. I don't think there's anybody alive that would have known them at their time, but obviously they were a part of the community, and what a community it was. I'm going to start in 1920 with Officer Richard Williams, and Santa Barbara in 1920, things were really happening. We had just had Gibraltar Reservoir finished. Finally, the city of Santa Barbara had enough water to last it for decades. They knew the crisis with water was over. Most of our streets, though, were still unpaved. Just 2 blocks from here, Carrillo Street was unpaved all the way over to Milpa Street. So there was a few things going on with that. And we also had our population was 20,000, and we had 2 daily newspapers. Now, we seem to think today that with the internet and all this coverage, we have all the news. Not even close. Here is what the newspaper had to say in 1918, mentioning our Santa Barbara Police Department. Sergeant Castle of the Police Department has been away on 2 weeks vacation and returned yesterday. He was tanned and happy. The sergeant said he visited the beaches around Los Angeles, but did not find anyone that suited him better than the beaches here at home. Officer Rouse, who has been acting sergeant during Castle's absence, is back on the Chinatown beat, and Officer Dick Williams left this morning for his vacation, which he will spend in San Francisco. Do we have news on your vacations today like this? Where you went, who you saw, and when you came back? That's news. Officer Williams also hit the newspaper because in 1920 they decided to have a thing on the most eligible bachelors in Santa Barbara. And Officer Williams, it says, his occupation, speed cop, sociable, age 34, a graceful rider, shuns society. His pastime, he works in a garden. He's acquainted with all speeders, because he was the speed cop. He prefers blondes. He's a good jollier. And his disposition is amiable, and his address, 627 De La Vina Street. So all the bachelorettes knew where to go to find Officer Williams. And he was also in the paper, and this again talks about what a small town feeling we had back then. Officer Williams seemed to have this aptitude for rescuing animals. Whether it was finding lost dogs, that was news. Somebody lost their dog. Officer Williams found Fido over in the lower side of the slough, rummaging around for something. He also had an affinity for chasing down cows. He rescued 6 cows at a bull from the Billings estate where they were eating all the shrubbery, a billy goat from a woman's garden on Milpa Street. He also rounded up a bull at the cemetery, which then turned on him, and according to the paper, chased him for nearly a mile before he got the better of the bull. And finally, he came across a heifer on Lower Milpa Street, and with no place to take the heifer, he tied a 40-foot rope to the heifer, tied it to the bumper of his patrol car, and then came up Milpa Street to the police department, where he left the heifer in charge of somebody else, and then went back about his business. Well, he was a Northern Horseman, and in that capacity, he was in the July 4th parade in 1921. Heading off the parade was a motorcycle officer, whose name I just forgot, but I can peek. Makes no difference. He was so important at the time. Oh, Officer Palmer. So he was the lead off for the parade, followed by the chief on horseback and 6 other mounted officers on horseback, one of them being Officer Williams. They were being first in the parade, so when they reached the end of the parade, they simply doubled back to watch the parade from the sidelines. As Officer Williams was watching the parade, the Chinese float entered by the Hop Sing Tong came by, and it was one of those long winding dragon floats with firecrackers. It startled Officer Williams' horse, which reared back and then started to flip. Officer Williams, being the great rider that he was able to do a backflip off the horse as the horse was going down, but he struck his head on the hood of an automobile nearby. Now, he laughed the whole thing off and he told the press, you know, I used to be bucked off better horses than these rodeo guys ever rode. I can do it. But something had happened when he struck his head, and he was unable to return to active duty. He rallied several times, and they couldn't figure out what it was. Was it something in his head? Something had happened to his heart? But he was pretty much bedridden all the way through December of 1921. And like I say, he rallied a few times, but could never get back to work. During this time, the city council noted that the officer, and the paper covered all this stuff in great detail, and the worry that was the insurance paying for his keep while he was off duty, and they noted the insurance company had lagged, but they were now catching up. Councilman Neil Callahan said, you know, we don't have a pension fund for our firemen and for our patrolmen, and they are the lowest paid people around here, and they can barely save enough to get by on their old age, so we should have a pension fund to take care of these officers. And so Councilman Callahan decided to make the first contribution to our pension fund, and then to keep it funded, what he suggested was they take a portion of the dog license fees for the city, and that should fund the pension fund easily. So I'm hoping that we have dog licenses and everybody's paid up, right? Okay. Well, unfortunately, on December 19th, 1921, Officer Williams passed away, and he was buried with full escort at the Santa Barbara Cemetery. Our next officer is a local boy, Officer Ronald Rodman Wainscott. His nickname was Raleigh. He was born 1903, and when he was 6 years old, his parents went through a divorce, and it was covered in the papers. It was scandalous, and you think a poor 6-year-old boy going through all of this. But he was of stronger stuff. He rallied really well. He went on, had a great career. He started working when he was 16 years old for the Southern Pacific Railroad. 2 years later, he was one of the officers of the union for the local Southern Pacific Railroad. For fun, he was a member of the Santa Barbara Motorcycle Club, along with his friend, the legendary Hap Hazard, who was one of the masters of speed in any bicycle or vehicle you could come across. And he sort of followed perhaps along with Hap in that, because the future Officer Wainscott was arrested on May 25th, 1921 for speeding. He was doing 33 at Bath and Cannon-Perdillo Street, and back then when you were speeding and got caught, you were arrested. And so you came in and saw the night judge and you paid your bail, then you left. Well, following that, he tried his hand at being an electrician. He got married and changed careers again, working for the Spritz Transportation Company. He was a bus driver, he was a chauffeur, he was a taxi driver. And finally, in 1930, he was hired by the Santa Barbara Police Department, and at that time, he and his wife, Viola, had moved to 333 West Ortega, where their rent was an astounding $30 a month. On the evening of January 12, 1931, a fire was reported at 435 West De La Guerra Street. A gentleman had fallen asleep while smoking a cigarette and lit his couch on fire. And the fire department from the Haley Street station was called to take care of it. And Officer Wainscott was over on Haley and Milpa Street and saw the truck leave the station 2 blocks away, so he took off after the truck, following it to the scene. As he approached the intersection of Haley and De La Vina Street in his Model A Ford, there was also a 1932 Cadillac approaching at the exact same time. His Model A Ford weighed 2,200 pounds, the Cadillac weighed 4,500 pounds, and he smashed into the side of the Cadillac. And 2 neighbors immediately rushed out. Being good Samaritans, they threw them into their own car and rushed him to Cottage Hospital, but sadly he had passed on from the accident. So we lost our local boy, Officer Wainscott. Following services at the Eagles Lodge and the First Christian Church, a procession of police, fire, and naval reserve took him to the Gleta Cemetery where he was buried. His wife, Viola, received a pension of $75 a month. Our third officer, Clarence Arthur Williams, was born in Sparta, Wisconsin, December 1898. And following his career there, it turned out he was going to be a farmer. Pretty much that's all he was doing, always listed as being a farmer, and not a lot of excitement in his life. But then he moved to Santa Barbara, and in 1928 joined the police department as a patrolman. And it was a Sunday night, October 16, 1932, and he had been a motorcycle officer for about 3 weeks. It was near midnight, and a speeder was seen coming along East Cabrillo Boulevard, so his motorcycle partner took off after the speeder, as did Officer Jensen. They were doing about 75 miles an hour on Cabrillo Boulevard to try to catch up to this guy, and something happened to Jensen's motorcycle. It started to lose control. Amazingly, at the speed he was doing, he kept it upright for nearly 300 feet before it just slid on its side and tumbled along with Officer Jensen. He was taken immediately to Cottage Hospital and lingered for 2 days before he passed away. At his side when he died was his brother Charles, his fiancee Mary Platts, and his service officer, his captain Jesse Butts, was there by his side when he went. As for the cause of the crash, it had been determined the motorcycle had been reported as having mechanical problems, but it had not been yet investigated or taken care of by the time he took it out that fateful night. Now, his funeral was nothing short of spectacular. He was a veteran of World War I and a member of the Elks, and so that led to a procession of Legionnaires and Elks taking his casket from the mortuary in the first block of Anna Moose Street down to the Elks Lodge, just down the corner from here on State Street and Sola Street, or Figueroa. From there, he was taken to the Southern Pacific Depot to be sent to Wisconsin for burial. The journey to the police station was led by 8 California Highway Patrol motorcycle officers, 8 Santa Barbara Police Department motorcycle officers, then his casket, followed by 16 police officers on foot, followed by 100 CHP officers on foot. And pretty much the entire route of State Street was lined with the population to watch this as he went to his final farewell. The reason we had all those CHP officers from everywhere was because there was a convention here that weekend, and so they all decided to stay on and honor their fellow officer. So he is buried at the family plot in Woodburn Cemetery in Sparta, Wisconsin. And our final officer I'm covering is Officer Henry Florence Evans, whose nickname was Bob, or Robert, whichever he preferred. He was born in Riverside in 1908. And 19 years later, he arrived in Santa Barbara, taking room at the Riviera Hotel over here on West Carrillo Street. And he got a job at the Columbia Drug Store as a soda jerk, or a soda fountain employee. And at that time, the 5'8", brown-haired, blue-eyed, strikingly handsome man met a beautiful Santa Barbara gal, Winifred Bodie. She was an accomplished piano player and singer, and she was covered in the paper all the time for her accomplishments. Anytime something happened, she was singing or playing piano. Well, they hit it off quite well, got married, moved into her parents' place. She was a bookkeeper at the Santa Barbara Packing Company. Well, meanwhile, by the time they got married, he was now manager of the Columbia Drug Store, but thought there's something better out there than the Columbia Drug Store. So he got a job as an ice cream maker at the Royal Ice Cream Company over on Chapala Street. And after that, he decided didn't like that, so he got a job. He was a sausage maker at the Santa Barbara Packing Company. Well, pretty soon he figured out, okay, soda jerk, sausage maker, ice cream maker, didn't do it, so he joined the Santa Barbara Police Department and was doing great, well-known and well-liked. In 1940 was promising to be a great year for the Evans family. They had just bought a house on the Riviera on Drexel Drive for $6,500. He'd had a promotion. He was making $1,840 a year. The chief of police made $3,100, so it's close comparison there. Well, it was around 10 a.m. on October 22nd, 1940, when he was called to an accident at the new state college being built on the mesa down by the beach. A worker had fallen from the scaffolding and fractured his back and was in great pain. Officer Evans decided to accompany the victim to the hospital in the ambulance. Didn't have to do that, but he was with this guy, and the guy was relating to him really well, so he got into the ambulance. The ambulance was heading up De La Veta Street, or up De La Veta Street towards Cottage Hospital. As they came up to the intersection, a gasoline truck heading east on Cabrillo Boulevard collided with the ambulance, crashing in the side. It flipped over and came to rest on its wheels at the opposite corner. They got another ambulance, took Officer Evans up to the hospital, and he passed away very quickly from the accident. Amazingly, the people in the ambulance were not hurt, nor was the driver of the gas truck. It is interesting to note that the gas truck was spewing gasoline, which spread over 3 blocks, heading down Bath Street and heading down the other streets. The fire department came out to the rescue, and they took all the gasoline and flushed it with their hoses into Mission Creek so it could be safely left in the middle of the creek bed. Can't possibly do that today. Well, Officer Evans had an overflow crowd at his funeral services with an honor guard of 14 policemen and 12 firemen, and he is buried at Santa Barbara Cemetery. And just a note about our next officer, Officer Gary. I was in the police station on January 13th, 1970, and I was talking to Officer Mackey, and I don't remember what we were talking about, but when you walked into the station, dispatch used to be over to your right, and you could always hear what was going on with those. And I heard the call from Officer Gary's partner, and time just stood still. All of a sudden, I was like in the center of the eye of a hurricane. It was all calm. My heart was going boom, boom. And we just stood there, Officer Mackey and I just looking at each other, and then the whole world just went boom and exploded. There were officers rushing in every direction. My heart was going like a trip hammer. I didn't know Officer Gary, never met him, but I went home that night and cried. It was just the most weirdest thing that ever happened to me, that I was part of something, and it just really affected me, as it still does to this day. So I hope I've given you a little bit of information about the fallen officers from the past and brought them a little bit to life for you all. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Neil. For those of you who don't know, Neil is very involved in the history of our fine city, and he and his sister Erin do wondrous things in digging out the history and letting us all know it, so thank you for that. One thing he forgot to mention to you is that the reason why he was in the department on that day, on the 13th, was he was being booked for some traffic violation, I think it was speeding. Everybody pretty well knows the history of Tom Gary and Detective Henry Kirkwood's incident over at Ortega Street back then. There's not a lot to rehash, but we just hope that you'll keep that story indelibly marked in your hearts forever, because it's part of our history, and sadly to say, it's going to happen again. That's not on a down note, because the officers that get involved in these kinds of situations are there with all their dedication and love for this community. Tom Gary was a man for all seasons and all reasons. Becoming a policeman, he was in the right place at the right time. Jane will tell you that he left a job with Southern California Edison and found his way over here and applied for a job here at the police department. His fate and destiny was sealed. Something that is unknown to all of us who don the uniform, but it was something we unwittingly and naturally do. We don't think about going out and getting into fights and domestic disturbances or shootings or whatever the case may be. We just do it. As a physical being, in stature, Tom was pretty big and pretty imposing. Not in a fearful sort of way, but in an appealing sort of way, because he always had this award-winning smile that drew you into him. He had that command presence that projected an air of confidence and trust. He also had a quality about him that made him very approachable both to the people in the community and his fellow officers. Always had a smile on his face, with some exceptions. He might have gotten a little frustrated from time to time and shown some dissatisfaction with some things, but he got over it quickly and moved on. So again, he had an infectious and award-winning smile that was very disarming. When you were around Tom, you couldn't help but relax. He just had that appeal to him. He prided himself with the finest set of teeth that he cared for almost to a fault. But it worked for him. And one thing I'll always remember him saying was that he'd rather go to a dentist than to the gun range. He just didn't like guns. And that's okay, but he also recognized it as a tool of his trade. Tom always took the time to patiently wait, and he was very attentive if he had a concern that you came to him about, with, especially a work issue. He was the big brother, so to speak, that some of us never had, and he never let you feel that you were less important, at least for the moment. He was focused in whatever he was attending to at the time, whether it be something of a personal nature or relating to work. He had a special interest in the working man's condition and a personal interest in people in general. Tom was a leader of sorts in his own right. He loved his job for all the right reasons that he became a police officer. Because of that natural ability, Tom became president of the department's Police Benefit Association, an unenviable position at best, primarily because it put him and any president of that association in opposition with the staff officers who were in management. There just seemed to be a natural conflict, but there was always a resolution to our problems. He did that job well and immersed himself in its complexities. He was a cop's cop. And there's several other officers here like Conrad Serbiran and Doug Winifred that had occasion to work with him. And I don't know if Kim did or not, but the point was he was there for you, he had your back, and you knew you could trust in him to help whenever you needed it. He was very focused, and he was on a mission of any, and if he was on a mission of any sort, look out, because he was on a roll. If he locked into something, he was fierce and tenacious. Tom just went after it. Everything aside, he got done what he needed to do. He handled that relationship with the staff well, and I'm sure it was very frustrating at times. Even though he might not always have prevailed, he forged on anyway. He was a great family man with a beautiful wife and Jane and 2 lovely daughters. He was an accomplished craftsman who preferred to do home improvements himself, and he did them well. A good friend of mine, Riley Harwood, one of Santa Barbara's finest, told me once in a conversation that we had that law enforcement is a very noble profession. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it made me realize that every day, the men and women in law enforcement who put on that uniform and go out into the unknown, prepared to face adversity and possibly lose their lives, serving and protecting others, are very special people. They do it because they love the job and have a strong commitment to the communities they serve. Tom was just such a man. When I retired in 2005, I realized I was the last remaining officer on the job that I had the opportunity to work with Tom. With his tragic death, we all learned something, and it did make our bond even stronger. That was one of the things, the good things that came out of that tragic incident. And it's something that officers recognize daily, no matter what department you're on or what state you're in. The incident he and Detective Kirkwood were involved in cemented our resolve and made us all realize why we had become police officers. Tom Gary is memorialized each year in the H. Thomas Gary Awards that are put on by the Citizens Council on Crime to recognize local law enforcement officers in Santa Barbara County agencies who have performed meritoriously or with valor. Many of you here are recipients of that award. The council is composed of community citizens who take that active interest in keeping Tom's memory alive. Tom's wife, Jane, has been an instrumental part of that council for the past 48 years and never having missed a single ceremony. Her dedication is second to none, and should be applauded for her efforts. Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much. There are other here today that had their own personal experiences and knew Tom well. I hope you'll take the time to seek them out and talk to them about Tom and Dennis Huddle. They are the history of this great department. Dennis Huddle, I was struggling with how to put this. It was a horse of a different color. He had his own personality. He was his own man. He was funny. He was great to be around. And we had the fortune of working together in side-by-side beats up in the north end of town. And at that time, in 1965, 6, 7, there wasn't a lot going on. So we had to be somewhat creative about how we're going to earn our pay that night. And it happens throughout the city on various nights, as you policemen all know. Police officers, sorry.
Thank you.
Got it? I stand corrected. And on some nights, when you couldn't be creative, we sat around and talked a lot. Well, we usually talked about work, right? Sure. I remember one turned out to be a painful evening, is we met up by the supermarket, by Harry's Cafe in the parking lot up there. There wasn't a mouse or a soul walking around or driving. If it was, we stopped it and checked it out. But as it stood, we went into the local market and we decided to each buy a bag of cherries. And we sat outside spitting cherry seeds and eating cherries and talking and having a pretty good time getting paid for it. But the long and short of it was, at the end of the shift, we paid for it dearly. I won't go into any explanation, but I'm sure you can gather the implication. Dennis was always reliable. Whenever we did get a call, he was there to back me up and I was there to back him up. And that stood true for everybody that was on the department at the time. And you just rushed over and you helped out. I wasn't quite sure how it was ever going to end when Dennis showed up, but it was always resolved in a favorable ending. And then we always had a laugh about it afterwards. I credit Dennis with saving me from getting a ticket from the highway patrol one day. After Dennis had been shot and he was going through his recovery, taking speech therapy and things of that nature, I explained to him that I was going to be going down to San Diego to visit my parents with my two nieces and taking my boat down. Of course, Dennis was an avid skier, and he says, well, I'll go. And I said, well, yeah, you can come, but you can't ski. And he said, who said? I said, Dennis, you just had a major injury, and I'm not sure that the doctors would go for that. He said, come on, let's go. We jumped in the car with the boat in tow and the two nieces in the back seat. And as we're going down around Oxnard, there was a highway patrolman stepped at the side of the road giving somebody a ticket. And so I naturally changed lanes over to the other lane and passed him safely. And I pulled back again only to find out that now that red light was behind me. And not knowing why, I pulled over and dutifully did what I was supposed to. And when the officer came up, I said, why did you stop me? He said, well, you're going a little bit fast pulling that boat. I said, yeah. He says, when he got around to where you work, and I said, I'm with the Santa Barbara Police Department, which is always a nice way to open a conversation. So he said, say, didn't you guys have a fellow shot up here not too long ago in a robbery? I said, yeah, we did. And he said, well, I'm awful sorry to hear that. I know some of us tried to attend to some events that were going on with that. And so I was kind of going like this, that he's sitting right here. You want to talk to him? And finally, he got the message that Dennis was the officer that had been shot in that robbery. And the long and short of it was, he says, you guys get on your way and have a good day. So we got down to San Diego, and I tell you, it was like pulling teeth trying to keep that guy off skis. But I have to admit, he got up there and he did a great job, and I was holding my breath all the way, just hoping, don't fall, Dennis, don't fall, please don't fall. And he didn't. He was an accomplished athlete. It was great working with Dennis. I know all of the officers that had the opportunity to work with him feel the same way. He was a dedicated employee, and he added a lot of zest and life to the job. So I think when he and Leanne got married, and of course we know his son's Dennis, and your brother's name escapes me, but your brother, Eric, that's right. A great law enforcement family, and they're here to stay. Kevin just got promoted to commander out at the sheriff's office, and I know Dennis would be very proud. I know there's plenty of displays around here that show some of the things that policemen do today. I've tried to bring a few things with me that show the police department from yesteryear, some of the artifacts that we had. There's one fellow that I considered an artifact and probably a great historian for the department, and he's 94 years of age now. His name is Dick Richmond, and Dick lives in Via Santa Barbara, right behind us across the street on Anapamu Street. I invited him to come over today, but he wasn't able to, so just keep good thoughts about those folks in your mind, and keep our prayers and hopes for all law enforcement everywhere in our minds and hearts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Daryl. Right now, we'll proceed with the presentation of the flags to Jane and Leanne. Earlier this week, these flags that they are being given were flown on this flagpole above the memorial. Ladies, on behalf of the Santa Barbara Police Department, we present you with these flags in honor of your sacrifice, your loved one's sacrifice. And now, from a survivor's perspective, Commander Kevin Huddle.
Thank you for everybody coming. Good morning. On behalf of my entire family, I'd like to thank the Santa Barbara Police Department, Chief Lunel, retired Chief Sanchez, the Santa Barbara PD Memorial Committee, and the many friends and family attending the ceremony today. I want to say a special thank you to Detective Michael Clater. Prior to this endeavor, we did not really know each other. Over the last several years, we've become friends, and I quickly learned that when Michael feels passionate about something, he gives it all of his time and energy. Michael never explained to me why he was so passionate about telling my father's story or having him included, but his hard work and dedication persevered, and I want to thank you. On behalf of my entire family, I want to publicly thank you for your perseverance, your attention to detail, your frequent updates, and for seeing this project through to the end. Your efforts have meant a lot to me, and I will forever be indebted to you. I know you are dealing with some personal health issues, and I hope you have a quick and speedy recovery. Law enforcement can be a very dangerous profession. Every one of us who wears the uniform knows that there is a potential for violence, and over the years, many of our brothers and sisters have made the ultimate sacrifice for our chosen profession. I also want to give a special thank you to the families of cops. I know we're not the easiest people to live with long shift work, long hours, missing holidays, anniversaries, and birthdays, but every time we leave the house, there's that dark reality that no one speaks about. That this may be the last time you see your loved one. Thankfully, we live and work in a relatively safe community. However, every one of us wearing the uniform is prepared to give the ultimate sacrifice to ensure law and order is maintained in our local communities. As many of you know, I was only 9 months old when my father passed away. From what I've been told about my father, he was extremely proud to be a Santa Barbara police officer. He cared about the community and was willing to sacrifice his safety for the greater good. I truly feel he would have no regrets for becoming a police officer and ultimately laying his life on the line for protecting his community. From August 1971 until February 1972, the McCrary family was responsible for at least 22 abductions and murders, dozens of robberies, and countless other offenses, constituting a crime spree that ranks among the most intense and lethal in American criminology. It is a story that is often overlooked and forgotten. It took a local beat cop to put himself in harm's way and make the ultimate sacrifice in order to stop this heinous family from hurting anyone else. The heroic events that took place at the grocery store on June 16, 1972, allowed the other investigators to quickly track down these criminals and bring them to justice. If you look over the history of significant criminal events that have occurred in Santa Barbara County, it is very satisfying that our local law enforcement officers have been responsible for stopping and solving so many of these cases. What is often forgotten is the pain of the families that are left behind by these criminal acts. Please keep the families in your minds and hearts. I'm very honored to wear the uniform and follow in my father's footsteps. Thank you.
And now for some closing remarks, retired Santa Barbara Police Chief Cam Sanchez.
Wow. The day is here. I knew it would get here someday. We didn't know when, but we knew it would happen. I want to thank, as most of the speakers have mentioned already, those that donated. Just amazing. I had a young man at Ralph's one day say, you know, my mother gave $5 to the statue. It just shows the caring of the community. I want to thank the families of the fallen. They made the ultimate sacrifice as well. And I thank them for that. What law enforcement and firefighters do is about honor, period. It's just that. It's about honor. The day we sign up, we're told all the stories of what might happen, the fun you're going to have, the creative times, like Daryl mentioned, that you have to create at times. But that it's the greatest career, both fire and police services. And I believe, and in my life, after 38 years, I will tell you, it is the best thing I ever did in my life, other than marrying the boss. But what we do is about honor. Many officers across the country have given their life. We do not know them. My encouragement to all of you, community and law enforcement and firefighters, are to remember these men and women who have given the ultimate sacrifice. As I mentioned at a council meeting, 2 of my dearest friends and partners on patrol were killed in the line of duty, and I honor them all the time. My wife used to tell me, do you polish that badge every day? And I'd say, yes, every day I polish this badge. From the time I was a patrol officer to the time I had the opportunity to work with these great men and women here. And my routine has always been, even with my retired badge, that I would mention Randy Simmons and Danny Pratt's name as I polished it. And after I mentioned their names 5 times each, I still stop at that moment. And it's the way I honor my fallen comrades who I worked in a patrol call with and got creative with and all those sorts of things. They did not know that was their last day, and neither did their families. It's been amazing. Danny Pratt left 5 children. His wife was 8.5 months pregnant when Danny was killed. And that little baby was born 2 months after Danny was killed. And she's in her 15th year as an LAPD officer today. Randy Simmons was the first SWAT officer ever killed in the line of duty. And he was always the greatest and most loyal friend when we worked gangs and patrol and vice. He was just one of those guys. He was one of those funny guys. By the way, he played for the Dallas Cowboys. He played for the Rams as a defensive back. He was an All-American at Washington State. He was an animal in terms of how he looked. Puffed out, 12-pack, not a 6-pack. And we, the gang unit would work out at the academy every day before we'd go out to work. And as you can tell, I don't lift a lot of weights unless they're, 12 ounces. But in the gym one day when he was pumping iron, I said, you know what, brother, someday I'm gonna look just like you. And I never heard a man laugh so hard in my life. He said, little brother, that is never going to happen. And I miss him dearly. He was a great guy, great SWAT man, and he's remembered all the time. As I mentioned before, the names of the fallen here are in other memorials in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, but they're now here at home where they belong. And I pray that we never have another name put on this wall. I will give the young people out there who are wearing a uniform today a little piece of history that I was born with in my first department, and that is when you drive by the police memorial that you saluted on your way out of the station. That's the tradition down south where I came from. I would just encourage you to, if you remember as you drive out of these gates, that you salute the 6 that are on this wall. It doesn't take much, but a half a second, because they did give the ultimate sacrifice. for their community. Their families have thought about this probably every day of their lives. And I thank those families because they gave the ultimate sacrifice. And I'm sure they worried every day that these men left home. Thank you for inviting me today. I've prayed for this day for a long time to come. You did a great job, young lady. And we went out to see the work being done and finished up. And that is just perfect where it sits. And I actually did point to that location, so thank you for that. And someday when you build your brand new police department, we will all come on that day and lift this up and put it there as well. Thank you for allowing this to happen. I want to thank the chief, the staff, the retirees that are here today. But we honor these men. They shall always be remembered because what you do is about honor, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, everyone. That concludes our ceremony. Please continue our celebration with everyone that you see behind you, our brothers and sisters in law enforcement, the fire service, public works. We've all got some great displays here that kind of demonstrate what we do. And some of those are a legacy of what these men here did. So again, thank you for coming.